Good evening, everyone. It's episode 255 of Rail Natter. Hello. Mr. Guy Snails is here, Gareth is here, Pythagorean is here. We're all here. Good, marvellous. We are here to talk about, well, I had to pick a title, and I picked one that felt most thematic, but there are three boiling pots of geopolitics going right now, and two of them at least are entirely instigated or significantly initiated by railway calamities. The third is very much with railways at its heart and has given us the title, which is Goodbye USAID, Hello China. But we are going to be talking about a variety, three railway geopolitical stories that are, of which one is very close to my heart, one I've been paying very close attention to, although I haven't said much about it yet. And the third is more interesting and is going to be, and actually it's the rare article read. We're going to go through and pick up some bits of an article in AFT, actually, kind of trash future style. We're going to go through an article as our last bit, but we're going to go through, we're going to talk geopolitics. We're going to talk about why railways are becoming more and more, and will indeed become more and more relevant, more and more pertinent to the world stage at large. And there is, there's a bit to go. Of course, first of all, we must give a shout out to, well, this is an interesting one. This is a prospective British Rail class, because I'm shouting out the British Rail Class 255, which never existed. It was called into being by, in true, maybe it will exist at some point in the future style, by Virgin Cross Country. And it was going to be basically a fixed formation, short-formed HST. And it was superseded by the Voyagers. But we have seen similar being used in Scotland and down in the southwest subsequently. So it's sort of, but they are not called Class 255. Anyway, the British Rail Class 255, it might have looked a bit like this, is all we can say, with those, just the weird Virgin livery that just never seemed to be of its time. It was both out of date and, I was never a fan of this livery, I have to say. Anyway, that's the British Rail Class 255. So not really a British Rail Class at all. We press on. Everyone, welcome to tonight's Rail Natter. As the Intercity 225 fades away. Oh, yes, you're right. It's 46 weeks without a shout-out, Howard Meow points out, and we're looking forward to the Class 301 EMU soon. Yes, let's get my enormous face. Oh, we're missing some illumination. Oh, that's better. And I've got a bit of a dweeb hair. There we are. It's a bit better, isn't it? I'm looking a bit rough and ready. Hello, everyone. Let's also make that a bit more civilized. Hello, it's Rail Natter. It's been a while, hasn't it? And yet here we are, and the technology still managing to not, still managing not to put my mouse in the right place in the right time. Actually, what I need to do is Control P, so that I've got my pointer, and then everything. Life is much easier. So, we're going to be talking geopolitics. It's an interesting one. I know a little bit about everything that's about the three stories, but I know most about the Serbian story, of course. There are a few people in fact, I'll just recommend one person who you should follow for seeing what's happening in Serbia, which is Lily Lynch. She will share and put out quite a lot on what's going on, very, very tuned into what's happening in the area, and sort of sees through some of the... We'll talk about Serbia in a moment and some of the politics of Serbia. We're going to start with Greece, though. And before we do, no news this time. This is kind of a news episode, but kind of not. We'll be doing a proper news episode in a couple of weeks, I'm sure. But this week, we're just talking about these three stories because I want to just explore them. I want to put a pin in them. We may not say much in great detail about all three, but I certainly, for example, want to pick through... Well, we'll get there. In any case, I'm just going to miniaturize my face to the top corner and say there is a content warning because there are going to be descriptions, images from train crashes here. Well, one in particular. Well, two railway incidents. So just a bit of a content warning on that. we're going to head to glorious Tempi in Greece. Here you can see the delights of the valley through which the road and the river could travel, and the railways around the corner here. It's a very fetching, very beautiful part of Greece. I mean, are there any parts of Greece that aren't particularly beautiful? In any case, no news intro music. No. Oh, did we? No, I don't think we did. I think it was the normal intro music. So Tempi, we start in Tempi, and of course, as you know, over 2 years ago. In fact, not over 2 years ago. I'll be very precise and specific about when the crash was. Back in February. Yeah, it was just over 2 years ago. 20th of February 2023. There was a head-on collision between two trains south of here. This is the Tempi Valley, about halfway between Tempi and Evangelismos, and there was an enormous fireball. There was an intercity train and an intermodal freight train that collided, killing 57 people, and the subsequent it was a very, very serious railway accident. It's the most serious since Santiago de Compostela, which I talk about a lot. Obviously, the crash on the curve, the crash was, well, let's jump to the pic. In fact, before we talk about the crash, the consequences of the crash have been felt way beyond. I talk about the crash in the book. In fact, the ramifications were, the initial. Let's just say it has implicated at time of recording, I think 46 state officials, something like that. It's like in the mid 40s, we have, so that's state officials right the way up to attempting to reach ministerial level. But the transport minister resigned after the crash, took responsibility, and I quote, for failing to bring Greek railways to 21st century standards. But he was re-elected just 2 months afterwards, so that didn't seem to have any effect. The consequence, basically, the state railway operator, but the liberalised model and the EU pressure, twofold things: EU pressure to liberalise the delivery of infrastructure upgrades, and classic lovely Greek corruption, or not Greek corruption, but European, our own glorious forms of corruption, resulting in lots of money being spent and upgrades not actually happening. But there's more to it than that. There's a lot more, and that's what a lot of these protests are coming out about, because there is a feeling that this represents the failures of government, the lack of interest at government right up to the top, that lack of interest in improving lives for ordinary Greeks. And the incident itself, which we are now going to jump to, was an absolutely horrific crash. And the consequence, there are lots of a strong feeling that there is an enormous cover-up going on related to what was being carried in the freight train, and why the firebomb was, this enormous explosion was quite so significant. You wouldn't expect anything dramatic like that to be carried in a train that was, in a standard intermodal train, something that goes off that dramatically. Again, how a head-on collision happened on a double stretch of track, what on earth the implications of that were. We will, by the way, look through the crash report. We will dedicate an episode to going through the crash report. The reason I haven't yet is because there's still so many moving parts to this. Like, still a lot of things that are just not clear. The intensity of the fire doesn't make much sense. Basically, like, the claims have come that there's a second electric arc which ignited silicon oils in the transformers of the two locomotives, which leaked into the environment. This has been disputed by a lot of people, because that is not usual or likely. It seems likely that there's some sort of fuels being transported. So there's a lot of let's just put it this way. There is a lot that it doesn't make clear, doesn't make much sense, and the investigation related to that explosion is not. It's I don't know. We're going to go through the report and understand that, but I believe that investigation is still not concluded in relation to the actual explosion. So there's still uncertainty in relation to the crash. It's an enormous incident, a horrific incident, and the reaction really. So, there were demonstrations in the the year afterwards. Thousands, tens of thousands of people taking part in strikes, in enormous protests in Athens, Thessaloniki, and other major cities. Talking about the fact that this crime will not be forgotten, and this refrain we'll see familiar. This refrain for justice, the fact that the justice system is not working, that people are not being held accountable, and in Greece they have legal immunity for ministers, which is again being challenged by the protesters, and there's just a strong feeling that the ministers are not being held accountable, and it's resulting in massive demonstrations and protests surfacing again this year on the in the run up to the second anniversary. So huge numbers again, led by students, as often happens, students and teachers leading these across major cities in Greece. I think one of the culmination of these rallies, there was some violence actually in kind of later on. But the culmination of these rallies, of which there were potentially up to 1 million people in Athens alone, so it's some of the most significant kind of protests and that Greece has seen in its modern history, in fact, has led to a vote of no confidence. At the start of this month, there was a vote of no confidence submitted by opposition parties, and the vote failed, but the pressure is kind of ramping up. This continues to ramp up. We're seeing the Prime Minister is saying no, it's not. We're standing firm. We will not be. We cannot politicize this tragedy, which is ridiculous because it's the consequence of politics. Anyone who says don't politicize a tragedy is often they're trying to result in there being no action and no accountability as a result of a tragedy. So yeah, it's this is going to continue to escalate, and we're seeing a huge amount of energy behind this escalating further. But is there an end to it? Is there an end to it? Oh, no. What we've seen here, and as we will see with Serbia, which I can talk about with much greater detail, is a real escalation in the feeling of injustice across the population, with the railways being a sparking point. And in this instance, it's a failure of it's a failure of public infrastructure, public investment, contracting strategy, procurement, and government oversight. All of these things combining, it's very. We will see a culmination of this, I hope, but will we see the collapse of the Greek government? I don't know. What I do know is that we'll be looking through this crash report soon for a rail natter to see what we can learn from it, see what there is in there that we can learn from. But as I say, touched upon in the book, and we will revisit this in the future. So now we must jump to stunningly beautiful and very interesting city, Novi Sad in Serbia. It's in Vojvodina, the kind of the flat northern part of Serbia. Gorgeous city, very interesting. It's got massive fortress on one side of the river that overlooks a lot of bridges, including several blown up ones that NATO blew up, and then the replacement bridges. So it's another river city. It's very beautiful and very interesting, and it has a rather fetching railway station that I had the delight of visiting. In fact, it was the first trip I did on the railways in Serbia, and the last trip I did out of the old railway station in central Belgrade, before they moved out to the concrete monstrosity 3 miles south of the city centre. That's another episode. But Novi Sad, what happened in Novi Sad? Well, something that has kicked off some of the largest demonstrations, if not the largest demonstrations, in the history of Serbia and indeed Yugoslavia. So the demonstrations are larger than the anti-government demonstrations that eventually ousted Milosevic. It's an enormous strength of feeling, and with an ear to the ground through family and through friends and through what Lily Lynch is publishing and others, and indeed finally the Western press catching up. This is a more dramatic threat to Vučić, who's the president and essentially the dictator of Serbia, than he has seen for a very long time. But this requires a bit of context to explain what in the hell is going on. What's the deal with Serbia politically? Now, Serbia, firstly, Vučić as a dictator is in position. He was the comms secretary for Milosevic, so he has roots in the fascist government as it was under Milosevic, although he will always deny them, of course. As many others did in the government, and unfortunately also in various bits of the opposition, because the politics in Serbia is a bit of a mess. But the Vučić is kind of been held in place by the EU, by the US, by NATO, as he is seen, and he certainly sees himself as a key maker, managing to, as he sees it, set the balance between stability in Kosovo, but sort of promising the rest of the world that Kosovo will be self-determined, whilst promising his own people that he will keep the world on the edge of that for as long as he can to avoid it actually happening. He sees himself as a power broker between Russia as a power, between China, and between the US and Europe. In a way, he sees himself as the kind of the pivot point between East and West. And I mean, to a limited extent, that is true, but it's a relationship of convenience, and he has been kept there by, more than anyone else, by the EU, despite the fact that he is a dictator, that he has sequentially and totally eroded justice, the freedom and the independence of the judicial system, of the legal system. The television systems are all, television, radio is almost totally state propaganda. It's you can go to Serbia and enjoy a country that feels reasonably comfortable and liberal, but it is you will struggle to get it if you're living in Serbia. You will struggle to get a job if you're not in the party. You will struggle to achieve promotions if you're not saying and doing the right things in accordance with what the party wants. It is a grim situation, and there have been protests. There were the 1 in 5 million protests a few years ago that reached pretty decent size, but Vučić weathered it because he knows that while he's still got the support of the EU, while he's still providing that pivot point between the EU, the US, and Russia, he is powerful. Now, what's interesting is, and we'll get to why these protests are happening in a minute. What's interesting about these protests is, that they are coming at a time when Vučić is arguably at his weakest, because Putin's power is, let's put it this way: either Putin's power is waning and he is doomed, and therefore Vučić loses his ally, or Vučić and Trump are going to be such close friends that Vučić's position is essentially no longer useful. Like, he doesn't need to be a middleman in a relationship that is, love and sausages. So we're in a situation where Vučić is pivoting in that sense, is weakening. At the same time, the EU is looking... Well, the EU is a mess politically in any case. It's run by morons and making extremely bad decisions. Do check your questions in, by the way, at my name, and I shall say things. And I sense that there is that the interest in, for a while as well, Vučić was seen as a Serbia was seen as a bit of a barrier against immigration from the rest of the world as well. I sense the conversation has moved on again, leaving Vučić a bit high and dry. But mark my words, the EU is one of the reasons he is absolutely still one of the reasons he is still in position. And because again, it's seen like he is seen by fools and leaders in the EU as someone who's holding up peace, and the expense of that is everyone in the people of Serbia. They have to cope with the pain. So, interesting question from a few people kind of jumping in and saying hello. Daniel Field. Hello, managed to catch Night Alive tonight. Hello, Daniel Field. I also travelled along to Novi Sad railway station. Crazy to hear about it after the news. Shame because it's quite a nice station. Yeah, it's a very nice station. If you go back to our episodes on railways in Yugoslavia, focused around the Belgrade Bar Railways, a 3-parter. We talk a bit about what the history of the railways is, and yeah, it's got a lovely sort of international style railway station. It's a lovely sort of that Yugoslav style, but it's particularly unique. It's an interesting station. I love it. The other thing Gareth is asking, one thing that sort of surprised me about Serbia was seeing murals of the Bosnian Serb leaders during the Bosnian Wars. Was that just because I was in rural Serbia? Yeah. Let's not try and pretend that there aren't serious nationalist tendencies within Serbia. Again, often in the countryside, often because Vučić basically pays for everyone to have a sandwich and get them coach loads them into the city centre and back out again. But even within the metropole, there are absolutely still nationalist sentiments. That's not but as we're seeing with one of the things that's really important about these protests is that they these are student-led protests. So the students have been doing these protests. They have put down very vigorous ground rules. Often in protests in Serbia, you wince because you see homophobic sort of placards, and you see all these and you see nationalist symbols and all these things. They've been really strongly the student leadership of the protests have been really strong to make sure that it is peaceful, that it is that it abides by rules, that not having homophobic sort of slurs and rubbish as the placards, that it remains an inclusive protest, that it remains as family friendly as possible. Actually, that there's a series of ground rules. Avoid nationalist, explicitly ethno-nationalist symbology, all these things. And as a result, these protests have gained a momentum like no other, because it's very difficult to. It's very difficult. The government and the authorities are finding it very difficult to, Vučić's sort of band are finding it very difficult to get a foothold in pushing it back. And the other thing is, it's building momentum in the rural areas as well, which Vučić is used to a monopoly of thought in the areas outside, in the sort of provinces beyond the major cities, like Novi Sad, like Niš, like Kragujevac. And of course, like Belgrade, outside of those major cities, Vučić generally has a monopoly on people's perspective, because many people see Vučić and his party as one preserving the integrity of their nation and even potentially sharing some irredentist thought about what the Serbian borders might look like. But why are these protests happening? What happened? What's this all about? Oh, by the way, it's worth saying that we had a resignation of a prime minister. So Miloš Vučević resigned at the start of this year. This is escalating, and they're marching between Novi Sad and Belgrade. They're marching from various cities to Belgrade. These protests are enormous. They are just the videos online. Just honestly, they bring a tear to your eye. These are enormous. They're strikes. So students, teachers, schools are on strike. There are various kind of wildcat strikes popping up. This is very difficult for Vučić. And also, crucially, the requests, the asks of the protesters are quite clear. It's not Vučić walk away, someone else come back. It is actually we don't. Vučić, you stay in place, mate. We need an independent judiciary. We need independence in the courts and in the legal system. And so this is kind of this escalation is. It's difficult for Vučić. He's not finding an escape from this. There is not an obvious off-ramp. I suspect he just is hoping that the energy comes out of it and it sort of whiffles into nothing. But it's not happening. It is not happening. We're seeing a continued escalation. Anyway, why did all this happen? Well, it happened because Novi Sad railway station, and I think we've talked before about the upgrades that are happening between Belgrade and up to Budapest, up into Hungary, a kind of a nominal high speed line, of which China have, and this is where the China piece comes in. So this wonderful 1964 station was being refurbished as part of the new high speed line coming through. In fact, you know what? Let's just quickly get the old Google Maps up, because I'll tell you what, I'll do it on maps.google.com. Let's just get this up, because I'm not going to dox myself, so bear with me while I just zoom out and zoom back in again over in Belgrade. It's worth it, because you get to see just lovely. It's been a while since I've been over. Lovely Zagreb, lovely Ljubljana. Let's find our way over to Belgrade. Here we go. So Novi Sad. Here we go. So you can see the station. Yeah, lovely. Okay, good. So I'm going to drag this up here and F11 it. So here is the station. Here, Železnička stanica. That's it. Yeah, that's it. That's what a railway station is. So you can see the physical work that's been going on. Actually, the station expansion. I wonder how up to date the imagery is. In fact, this is the point where you can see that they have reopened the line, but at this point you can see the entirely. I mean, it's kind of strange seeing the approach they've taken, which is, keep the railway open. No, we just dig the whole thing up and totally relay it from new, which is an interesting approach if we're talking about sort of, if we're going to talk about how we do civil engineering. It's kind of an interesting approach. We can see the level of new infrastructure because there is this huge amount of work that's gone into creating essentially a high-speed line between Belgrade and Novi Sad, which is great, and beyond. If we zoom back out, I think we've gone through this before, haven't we? And beyond, and you can see the work that's been going on with the high-speed line. So there's all this physical work here setting up, and the varying levels of finished and not finished that are going on for upgrading this line. It was a pretty pathetic little bit of railway before, and the point is that it's going to be this. Actually, looking at this, it looks like they're getting there with much of it because that looks nice and new. So there is this progress to build this, and as part of this work, there was this new station being constructed. This refurbishment of the existing station. This is an old station from the 60s, and the refurbishment was going on up to so nearly 60 years. This station's been up, doing a wonderful job, admittedly. And this is the story of lots of wonderful buildings across the former Yugoslavia, without much TLC. And in fact, there's a really nice picture here that's in the. I'm going to bring this picture up here. Actually, wait a minute. How can I do? Let me just open this in a new tab and bring it up. There's a nice picture here of them actually building the thing. You can see with this lovely canopy, and then they're constructing the support, and the support is mostly cantilever, but it just has a little bit of extra help from these sort of steel tension elements, these sort of tension members holding the roof up. So bear that in mind. You've got this cantilever structure, but with some of the forces being, some of those kind of moments being picked up by these sort of tension members, these angled tension members, and the result is a pretty fetching finish. So you can see, if you look, this is the before picture, by the way. You can see bad things have happened at the bottom. We'll get there in a second. You can see that there's this canopy, but there are some upgrades being done to it. And as part of this work, there were, let's say there's some additional, there significant reconstruction of the canopies, upgrading of the kind of the facade materials. And China, again, we're saying that China Railway International Company Limited, a subsidiary of the China Railways Group, and the China Communications Construction Company, so CCCC, one of the big kind of Chinese big Chinese kind of construction conglomerates that have been doing stuff across the world, particularly related to the Belt and Road Initiative. And on the 1st of November 2024, in the midst of this work, there was a collapse. And as a result of this collapse, 15 people died. So it's a large number of people dying. This collapse onto people in the middle of operation of train operations. It's pretty horrific, right? Forgive me, I said 15. 16 people died. Someone later died. Someone died later on from their injuries. So clearly something had been going on to, there's a mixture of things going on here that related directly to the incident. Firstly, it's the management of the client organization, essentially, so Serbian Railways, the inputs of government, the aging assets across the whole of the former Yugoslavia, in this case, particularly in Serbia, assets that are legacy from the socialist state that have just not been touched and upgraded since, that have just been ignored. And also the untouchability of China as an entity, given that China are investing a huge amount in Serbia. The Serbian government do not want to unduly criticize the Chinese, essentially organizations of the Chinese state, because they fear that China will say, well, goodbye, you don't get any further investment then. all of this is extremely unjust, as I'm and unjust, as I'm sure you'll agree. None of this is good, and so within a month we had student-led protests starting to break out. So we had a situation where that was November, and pretty rapidly we see that was November 2024, and yes, I didn't realize. 21st of March. So that's literally 5 days ago. That it was 15. It was 5 days ago that the 16th person died. So that's why I had 15 in my head, but that is why it's 16 now. Good grief. So the collapse of the station canopy, the immediate aftermath was that there were protests pretty rapidly. There was lots of umming and ahhing, and within people regret being expressed by ministers. People visiting the disaster site. Vučić made his usual thing that he said, which is justice for those responsible, which is like, you can basically find one individual who you can throw the book at and then say that everything's fixed and there's no problem. It's kind of a bit like blaming costs on HS2. It's like you just blame the costs, and then it means you don't have to worry about unpicking any of the other complicated stuff as to why we can't deliver major infrastructure. It's a scapegoat. Costs are HS2's scapegoat. In this case, the minister, the prime minister stepped aside. The transport minister, the varying sort of, I was going to say, and at this point, like this is very recently. This is start of November. There's a rapid escalation in the scale of protests from January onwards. So at the end of January, Vučić resigned as prime minister as the protests climbed and climbed and climbed and climbed. So it was by the time, So Vučić started making concessions, including promising that all prosecutorial documents related to the disaster would be publicized, which is a rare thing, of course. Eyebrow raised and remains to be seen. Announced that all currently held protesters would be released and pledged to pardon any protesters if they are convicted at trial. So this is the first concession since Vučić popped up in 2012. But they did not acknowledge the calls for his resignation or for the work to improve the independence of the judiciary. So I'm just going to pick up a few comments that are in here. So, so we have isn't the 200-kilometre-an-hour line meant to extend through the south of Serbia too? There aren't plans for that at this point. No, it's just it's Belgrade northwards at this point. Wasn't the China factor mostly in place because it was there are upgrades to the lines across the rest of... Have a look at the Belgrade Bar episode. We go into a bit of detail about that. Damien asks, wasn't the China factor mostly in place because it was a throwaway for it wasn't our fault, it was the Chinese when they were pressed to hand over the construction docks to see what was? Well, there's a bit of both, but I suspect strongly that China will have applied pressure to not have... to not get picked up on too much during as part of this. So whilst it might be you might have got a few throwaway, it's the Chinese fault, I suspect that not with any teeth, not with any intention of it continuing at scale. So is this going to result in change? I think it's more likely that we're closer than ever before to and then there's a lot more detail in the specifics of this. Again, it's the sort of thing that I don't think we'll ever get to the specifics of the truth on this, not anytime soon. But what is exciting is the fact that we are closer to change in Serbia than I think we have been in a very, very long time. It's to the point where, people who I know who would generally not be getting involved in anything like this, because the whole point of a political, as we know in the UK, the whole point of having a grinding down political environment where you feel like you can't make any change happen is that you disengage from it and therefore become someone who can be ignored as discountable. And that's absolutely happened in Serbia as much as it's happening in the UK, where people just don't, they're like, oh, I don't care about politics, I just want to get on with my life, try and have as nice a life as possible, and do the same for my kids, and that's the end of it. And the trouble with that is unsustainable, because you will not provide a good environment for yourself or your kids if you disengage from the way that your country is being run and the injustices that impact on people around you. So people who have tried to keep their heads down are now putting their heads up and raising them above the parapet in Serbia in a way that has not happened for 25 years, basically. And it's extremely exciting. I've got quite a few friends who are out there now who are protesting, and it's exciting. And I really hope that the pressure becomes intolerable for Vučić, or he slips up and makes a mistake. He is already starting to use weird weapons on protesters. There's some use of sonic weapons, and during the 15 minutes of silence that they were doing, and that was pretty unpleasant for people who were at the protests. So he's going to slip up, and I hope that the slip up doesn't involve things like opening fire on protesters or anything. But it's at the point where the numbers are large enough that that the protesters can just realise, like they did in 2025, you can just raid Parliament. You can just get stuck in. You can just go in there. It's fine. So just get stuck in. It's exactly what happened in 2025, and it eventually fermented in the departure of Milosevic to The Hague, and then, the rest is history. So that is a bit of a summary of, and again, sorry, the point of me telling these stories is that in both these instances we have a situation where the railways are a key tipping point to foment political change. And this is not just coincidence. This is because railways are becoming more and more relevant to the way that our economies function, the way that we can function sustainably in the future, even for countries that are much further behind in thinking about how they operate sustainably, like Serbia. Railways are seen as part of their economic future, absolutely critically and correctly, in fact, seen as part of their economic future. And therefore, there is this focus and focal point of progress, but also if this dramatic failure, with all the activity, this dramatic failure has laid bare a lot of problems that some of this stuff is seen as only a sticking plaster for. So it's there's some interesting discussions about economics and so on. Aren't some of the weapons they're using illegal? There's some discussions about the sonic weapon that they're using. I don't know enough about it, but it is supposedly an illegal weapon that they were using, yes. Samuel Wilkins is saying, wait, are you saying that railways will be the future? Know any good books on that? I couldn't possibly comment on a book that might be called How the Railways Will Fix the Future. Yeah, Victoria is saying, Almoria is saying, disasters like this makes the EU completely useless at breaking down barriers in infrastructure. Yeah, I have to say all of this, and I'm not anti-EU. It's just that the EU is completely useless, particularly when it comes to transport and justice, and not being spineless cowards when it comes to dealing with people on the fringes of people, whether it's people in countries on the fringes of the EU or whether it's people migrating across the EU borders. The EU is just a spineless organisation. The EC and the European Parliament are they're just not equipped to cope, because it's full of a bunch of neolibs, full of some of the worst, weird sort of treasury-brained Europeans with rimless glasses you can possibly imagine. So of course some of the way they think about things is absolutely bonkers. It doesn't mean we should pull it down. It just means that we need to keep push. We have to push for change. We have to push to foment change. Of course, it's the idea that the EU is woke is unbelievably hilariously detached from reality when it's anything but. But that gets constantly thrown around, doesn't it, at the moment? Anyway, I'm going to take this horrible picture of what is a gorgeous railway station that has been vandalised by both neglect and negligence. It'd be interesting to see exactly what has happened here, but I fear we will not find out, just as I kind of fear we won't get a clear final picture at Tempi. But we must jump to Kapiri Moposhi in Zambia. So it's now for something completely different. Well, not entirely, because what I want to talk about is a slightly different story, but one that the FT did a really nice long read on it, and it's a really nice long read that the railway that China hopes will take on the US in Africa. So this is about aid, and it's absolutely politically pertinent right now. It's a really nice story, and I'm not going to read the whole thing because that's plagiarism. But basically, the Tazara Railway, built in 1973, linked. In fact, there's a nice picture down here. So it's a really nice read here. But you can see if we scroll down, it's just a really nice profile of people making use of this railway that was built. And the railway looks familiar because actually the architecture is not totally dissimilar to Novi Sad. It's that internationalist style, that internationalist sort of socialist style that inherits, that in this case is because it's the architecture is directly from China. So the Chinese built this in the 70s. And let's jump to the map to have a little look at what's going on. So here you can see here's the map, and what we can see is on the one side, it's basically connecting right the way across from. This is the fun politics. Is on one side of the this is basically like the midriff, or it's kind of the southern midriff of Africa, and you have the railway line that was built much more recently from Lobito on the coast in Angola up through into the DRC to Kolwezi, with intended expansions into Zambia. Meanwhile, so it's into Kitwe in Zambia. Meanwhile, south of that intended expansion, and an enormous copper belt, by the way, because this is always about minerals, the Chinese-built railway, built in the 70s, was from Dar es Salaam in Tanzania up through into Zambia to Kapiri Mposhi, and you're kind of almost frustrated. Again, I talk in the book about railways built for extraction. Painfully, these are still railways built for extraction, although they have found use for locals, but they are still built as ways for imperial and colonial powers to extract mineral wealth from, in this case, sort of South Central Africa, and extract it to the coast. And indeed, extract it to the coast, as you can see, it's this way to the US, the Atlantic, and into the Indian Ocean for China. Of course, the railway would have continued on to the capital into Lusaka had it, been entirely for or at least partially for the benefit of those in Zambia, but and those potentially using. But anyway, alas, not. So let's jump back up to the top and just kind of pick a few bits out from this story. So. Mukololo Chanda, that's the very smiley lady further down, by the way. They paint a really nice kind of image of this lady. She still recalls the glory days of Africa's Freedom Railway. Almost 4 decades ago, fresh from high school in Zambia, she began working as a switchboard operator on the railway built by Mao Zedong's China that she believed would steer her newly independent country to prosperity. It was the only reliable way to travel to many places. Everyone was using it, said Chanda, a bubbly 55-year-old who is now the station master in Kapiri Mposhi, which is where the railway links copper-rich landlocked Zambia to Tanzania on Africa's east coast. So I like this profile of this bubbly 55-year-old, and you see the picture, and you can absolutely get the vibe that she's a very friendly station master. But there's this also in trains that don't look too bad. They look quite smart, actually. But the point is that this railway is starting to decay a bit, and so there is so at the time there were both African kind of both Zambian and Tanzanian and Chinese kind of colleagues working together. China withdrew, but they're back. They're coming back, and they're coming back with a vengeance. And partly why they're returning is that USAID is quite substantially withdrawing. From its commitments across the world, and that includes and has the potential to include. There are some interesting discussions actually that Trump is actually all for this because it plays into the anti-China stuff, but I'm not so sure. But USAID, one of the things they're doing is funding expansion of the railway coming in from the other side. So the railway coming in from, let's get the map back up, coming in from the west. This expansion up into Zambia, providing an additional connection. Again, it's like, well, connect these bloody bits of railway. It's like, yeah, come on. In any case, this is the stories behind this are really fascinating. It's well worth having a read through, and it's really kind of quite interesting. It's also fun because basically what was Rhodesia, was shutting its borders, Rhodesia being a pain in the ass, and so that was causing problems with transport, and so that gave China the incentive to bypass Rhodesia. Boohoo, you're now Zimbabwe. R.I.P. No regrets. In any case, so a huge amount of money was then kind of forked out in basically loans, but kind of interest free, to build this railway. Lots of labourers. And it was it remains the biggest Chinese aid project, as the FT is pointing out here. The Tazara to this day is still the biggest Chinese aid project implemented in Africa, says Tim Zionts, a lecturer at the University of Freiburg. It continues to be a symbol of the Chinese-African all-weather friendship, as many officials on both sides often refer to it. Belt and Road Initiative, BRI, which is the Chinese initiative to expand its trade routes across the kind of the mega continent, if you like, have now kind of dispersed the best part of about £1 trillion in loans kind of across the board for infrastructure. But the peak in Africa was actually in 2016 as a result of kind of Beijing pivoting away from the kind of the big major projects that they basically provide all the cash for, to taking stakes in projects that it then operates. So taking a bit, if you like, a bit more of a neolib model. Oh, there's a guest link. Oh, yeah. I thought this article is accessible to everyone because I've got access to it. But if you don't, that's the thing to work out. It's a good article anyway. Also, the fact that I'm scrolling through probably means you can read it off the YouTube video. But anyway, thanks to Toro, by the way. Very kind. Mr. Geisnels is pointing out it doesn't fix the extractive design of the Angolan railways. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's all about like coast to inland, and much of the railways in Africa are very much that. Particularly this part of Africa. Well, to be honest, all of the whole of the African coast, right the way around the whole continent, you can just see countries with their national railway systems built that don't make much sense for those national railway for those countries at all, because they've been designed to just take minerals away from to the sea basically for extraction. So there's this interesting discussion about the fact that China is moving towards these small and beautiful projects, but with the withdrawal of USAID, it looks suspicious. Like, by the way, there's this lovely profile of the fact there's this Chinese diaspora in Zambia in this Copperbelt area. It's really interesting, just absolutely fascinating, and yeah. So there's this kind of conflict in the story. The FT picks up there's two sides. There's the USAID being slashed to bits, which means we might see a total withdrawal, but there's the alternative, and China may well respond to that and fill in the gaps a little. But the opposite to that is we might see a situation where Trump, for some reason, is actually chucking money into this. I mean, one of the things that Trump actually founded this, what's called the DFC, which is let me remind myself what it is. It's like the development company. It's like the something development company. It's like basically a US sort of de facto company that sort of, anyway. Same way Wales and Australia's railways are also largely extractive and critical, Simon says. Yes, absolutely. Egypt is the exception that proves the rule because the entire population lives in line anyway. Well, yes, quite. Gregor McIntosh thinks it's a good thing that China's taken over from USAID. Yes and no. Both China and the US have their colonial intent here. China's not doing this altruistically. We should be wary of any kind of mass, large kind of economic player coming in and spending folding money in areas, and what their intent is and what their intentions are. But as I say, this FT article is really nice because it paints this story and it tells the story of what some of these major geopolitical maneuvers looked like in the 70s and what the impacts were. And in this case, I would say largely positive, actually, for the construction of that railway. But as Branham Chitalu says, who's a worker at one of the mines up in Kitwe, he points out that working in those mines is pretty difficult. The pay is rubbish. It's really rather uncomfortable conditions. Again, feeling exploitative here. So we have a situation where this story, it's a lovely piece to look through. But we have a situation again where railways are this linchpin, this massive linchpin in the thrust of political power. Arguably one of the key battlegrounds between the US and China right now in terms of geopolitics, in terms of international trade, but also the race for minerals as the car industry, among others, desperately tries to assert its existence for the future. They need things like copper for batteries. We need things like copper for for all the all the electronics and all the other things that we need copper for. It's fascinating, and it's the point of all this episode really was to kind of point out that, firstly, to be aware of this stuff happening and pay attention to other stories going around and keep your eyes open to it. Call out anyone who's going and riding around on railways internationally as an influencer without interrogating what they're doing and why they're making those journeys and what the geopolitics of that is. For example, taking the train into the Indian railway that's been built into Kashmir region and questioning why that railway is there, what its intentions are, perhaps why it's been built to bring huge amounts of Hindutva, and certainly it changed the ethnographic kind of the profile ethnically in that region. Despite the fantastical civil engineering being built, and maybe you have a nice time on that train, maybe have a think about what's going on there, and likewise thinking about some of the extremities of the Chinese network. The Chinese high-speed network reaching up into the Uyghur populations and such. Think about what's happening. All the stories from a very long time ago, railways as mass geopolitics for the majority of it, the British Empire, is still happening today. And it's interesting, appalling, and something that we can look at and think about, because it allows us to think about what the future will look like and about what this could look like in the future, and where we see their opportunities and where we see their challenges. But I just wanted to pick that up. Hopefully that was interesting. It's something a bit different. 3 different stories, a little bit of background as to what's going on in each. And something, again, as ever with the Rail Natter, a little bit of an amuse-bouche for you to go and dig into what you find interesting yourselves, if you're the sort of person like me who then goes into an enormous Wikipedia explosion to read as much as you possibly can. By the way, Detour has popped a guest link to the FT piece in the Discord for the first 3 views. So if you're wanting to go in there, go in and grab and do read. It's a very interesting FT piece, fair play. And if you are subscribed to the FT, then great. Ian is also pointing out that it's helping with military movements in Kashmir. Absolutely. Yes, Michael C. The Rail Natter unofficial slogan is "Context exists." Maybe that's going to be the T-shirt we do. Is we have a picture of Thomas the Tank Engine and just have "Context exists" underneath. Maybe that's the next T-shirt. Yeah. Nerdian1 says, "Hi Gareth, miss you on WTYP." I miss being on WTYP as well. I had such a delightful time, but impossible with the day job to do that as well. Ruben Jelly, it's fascinating. Thanks for covering these things. Yeah, hopefully interesting. There's lots of. I'm sure we could talk about the trains that they're buying and the tracks and things, but actually those aren't the interesting things here. The story and the people involved. That's why I like the FT piece, because it profiles a few of the people involved. It's so important to just think about the human element, the people who are involved in this, the people who are taking the train, benefit from the train, but also suffering from it, perhaps, as well. The delights and the joys. Everyone, that's been good fun. So, the usual outro bits and pieces. This has been Rail Natter, and we are available on all good podcasting platforms. As a little hint, by the way, there's potentially a new little sort of set time scale audio-only project in the works that if you're a Patreon person, you know about it already. But it's not going to appear anytime soon, but it's brewing. There's some interesting stuff brewing, so keep an eye on that one. But yes, all good podcasting platforms. Please do give a review and a like or a rating or a little comment, whatever the interaction you could do on your podcasting platform. Do that, because it's a good thing. It helps. Patreon.com/Gareth Dennis for supporting more of this to happen and hearing more about some of those interesting little tidbits about behind the scenes shenanigans. Hearing more about my KSP exploits, because I'm definitely going to do a Patreon only KSP stream at some point soon. Gareth Dennis /merch for the merchandise, of which maybe there's going to be some new more stuff going on. Gary Stevenson seems to be bombing the algorithms. Who dis? PayPal.me/Gareth Dennis for the exchange of use, and GarethDennis.co/Discord for the chat to continue ad infinitum. Jacob, I saw you in here, by the way. Don't think you got away without me spotting you jumping into the chat. It's lovely to see you in here. An absolute delight. And also, whenever there's the crossover between me doing Rail Natter and work people, I always get stressed out, maybe not stressed out is the word, but hyper self-aware, let's put it that way. But shout out to Jacob, who is an absolute legend and is one of the core crew that helps our test tracks function delightfully. Not that I'm crossing over my day job with Rail Natter. At some point I probably will have to talk to you about test tracks and what they're all about, won't I? Anyway, for the future. Next week, I'm going to skip out the usual thing. Get the book if you want to get the book. The book covers so much of this, and I'd be delighted for you to. I'd be delighted to. Delighted. I'm sorry, I'm being distracted. Yes, everyone. To those of you who are angry when I get distracted by the chat, that's happening right now. Yes. Imagine one such engineer may be in the chat who great if some rail engineer drew up plans for a north-south rail line through Wales and then did several live streams on the topic. Yeah, that's me. I did that. That's me. Anyway, right. Stop teasing me, you monkeys. It's time to get ready for the 200-year anniversary later this year. Zero Winter, you're right. It is. The 200-year anniversary of what, though? Sam's saying, dare I ask about the book tour? It's still happening. I just need to finalise dates. It's going to be back end of this year, like kind of probably like through summer and later in the year, just because it's just I've been travelling so much on the battle bus for the test tracks that it just means that I've had less time to sort of sit in the evening and go, you know what, I did help this week with childcare and being a dad, and therefore I can feel comfortable doing some stuff tonight. But that's not been a situation. I'm currently looking around the activity room in my house and going, this is 2 days worth of work to tidy up. Dear Christ. Anyway, next week, episode 2... No, not episode 253. No, episode 256. There we are. That's better. Episode 256, Locomotion's New Hall. I am going to finally put this episode together and put it out. I think that's next week. So I will be doing that on Tuesday. It'll go out on Wednesday. So it's a pre-record. So that should be nice. I'm glad you enjoyed my downstream ep, Nerdian. Very pleased to hear it. So... Omicles just got the book yesterday, been struggling not to finish the whole thing in one go. Struggling not to finish the whole thing in one go. Well, that's very kind. No, thanks to those of you who've been buying it. An audiobook version as well is available with me reading it, if that's the sort of thing that floats your boat. And very pertinent to what we're discussing now among all the other things. It's kind of frustrating how much has come to pass over the last sort of year since I finished writing the thing that is pertinent. I like a few it's stayed pretty much entirely intact still. There are a few things that I would like to update in it, but that's just the me. It would never be finished if I was allowed to keep doing that. I'm glad you enjoyed the cover art as well. Right, so... Oh, there's a little bit of an unofficial Rail Natter meetup going on next week. That's nice. Tidying up is technically an activity. Yeah, I mean, exactly, JK Outdoors. Yeah, and you would know, being someone who is outdoors. Being outdoors inherently is an activity. Ruben Jelly saying that downstream clip with the motorway comparison is amazing. I'm glad you enjoy that. Yes. Michael C reading the book as well and enjoying. I'm so glad. It's a book. It's a thing for you to have and flick through and refer back to, hopefully in a useful way. Lots and lots. It's on Audible. I wish it was available on more places, but I think it's Audible. It might be Audible only. If that's a real challenge to you, speak to me and we can work something out. But yeah, anyway. Right. Anyway, enough of that. Yeah, the book tour, 10 locations. It'll be like an unofficial Rail Natter tour, but yeah, as soon as I have dates, it'll be advertised, and there'll be special guests at each of the locations as well to join me and chat about book. So, enough of that. Everyone, it only remains for me to wave vigorously at you and say thank you so much for joining this slightly different, but hopefully interesting episode of Rail Natter. Absolute solidarity to everyone out there protesting all the nights that you are, Saturday nights in Belgrade. Shout out. Hannah Goodliff, we've had our t-shirt suggestion, by the way. Thomas the Tank Engine with context exists written underneath. There we go. It's a suggestion for you. Anyway, cheerio, everyone. Cheerio.